Hi, and welcome back to Morgan on Purpose, the podcast. I'm incredibly excited to welcome our next guest. Danielle Steer combines so many issues that I and all of you are passionate about. She spent more than a decade working with startups, more specifically, helping build bridges between those startups and big Fortune 500 companies. She created Lunar Startups with American Public Media to help firms accelerate growth. She co-founded Tundra Ventures, a venture capital firm, to provide pre-seed investments to promising firms. And now she's got her hands on a whole host of cool things, from sports development and revenue streams to change management. And I should note that she's done all of this with an eye toward helping women. I could say more, but I think we'd be better off handing the mic over to Danielle. Welcome, Danielle, to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Morgan. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. So you didn't set out to work in startups, from what I understand of your background. How did you find yourself in the world of business building and venture capital?
Thanks for the question. So when I started my career, one of those elder millennials that graduated into a recession and wasn't quite sure. I knew that I wanted to be impactful. I knew that I was really passionate about helping others. And I didn't know exactly what that meant. So I went and pursued graduate education, a master's of public administration at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies. And while I was there, I was looking at, I'm a data wonk. So like, what's happening in the world at large? How does that tie to my own experiences? What does the data say are the best interventions for helping people do better across the board? I grew up in a family where I really saw kind of the downside effects of when especially women are not financially independent or empowered. And I saw that on the global scale as well. And so I thought, this is a place that I have personal drive and mission to kind of figure out and to look at. And so I ended up embarking on a career, what I thought was going to be in international development, found my way into working with women who were entrepreneurs in the Andes Mountains of Peru, came back to the States, knew that there was a ton of work that needed to happen here in the States as well as it relates to building better platforms for women, for people of color, for folks in general who maybe are starting out their first business. And I think embarked on this kind of windy career looking at how do we take really wicked, complicated systems that have both known and kind of cryptic rules for how they engage and make access to social capital and intellectual capital a little bit more easy to access for folks who want to build in those environments and really solve problems that they're experiencing or that their communities are experiencing. So it's kind of at the core is like financial independence for women. And then because there's such great data around the importance and economic value of building businesses, I really honed in on that, supporting entrepreneurs. And then, now as a capital allocator myself.
Yeah. So thank you. One thing I've enjoyed about getting to know you is I think we come at this from a similar place of we both pulled the thread of financial empowerment, and that led to entrepreneurialism in some capacity, and something that I hope it's okay. Danielle spent a lot of time in Latin America, I believe, working with economic development there. And a lot of my passion for economics and finance and financial development and all that stuff similarly comes from my experience in Central and South America. I would love to learn a little bit more about what that thread means to you, the connection between financial empowerment and entrepreneurialism.
I think going again back to the data is, there's not a whole lot of causation when we're thinking about how do we improve people's lives. However, there is one of the strongest correlative relationships between starting a company and financial independence than any other intervention that international development professionals have been able to leverage over the years. Of course, we got to think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs and access to shelter and food and security and all of those things. But once we have that core foundation kind of addressed or in some kind of basic form, then looking at financial empower on top of that the strong correlation and relationship between entrepreneurship and wealth building is undeniable, right? We live in a capitalistic society. Everything that we do or think, our frameworks, our cultural frameworks, our societal issues and pressures, and I think what really binds us and unites us, whether it's, as Americans, as folks that work in entrepreneurship, as Minnesotans, or whatever context of identity you want to put around that, the single thing we have in common across all of that is capitalism. And so really figuring out how do we better support people to thrive in the context of that framework, I think is ultimately what it comes down to. And that's overly simplistic, of course. There's so much more complexity. But I think that ability to kind of get down to the root, a lot of times when I was in grad school, we talk about this iceberg problem, right? And in an iceberg, you see 1/10 of what actually is happening, right? Those are kind of the symptoms up on top. And then underneath, there's this huge iceberg under the water, or the surface of the water, that has so much more complexity and kind of density literally to it. And I think that entrepreneurship is an example of how we kind of get further down into the how we make and improve people's lives and how we help them build wealth. You can think about it. Probably many of your clients have multiple revenue streams, right? Whether that's an entrepreneurial venture they're actively starting, founding, engaging, and running, or if it's maybe something that they're investing in somebody else who's doing that. I think that's an obvious and clear way in capitalism that we think about around revenue and kind of being able to grow your wealth. Entrepreneurship is a fantastic avenue to do that.
Yeah. I always think about entrepreneurialism as something that's fundamental to each and every one of us, right? It's just like a basic expression of our freedom and us pursuing wants and goals and supporting neighbors and family and all that fun stuff, or our community. You think about the oldest, let's say a trading bazaar, or like that's fundamentally just an act of entrepreneurialism, whether you're making purchasing decisions or selling decisions. So yeah, it's like basic and fundamental to us, and it's an expression of freedom, right? At the end of the day. So what, kind of flipping a little bit, what are you passionate about right now, both in terms of maybe the work you're pursuing or doing, and then also with your community?
I appreciate the question. I think my personality type, I love to look at, okay, what's everyone talking about and getting overly excited about, and how do those things actually work in the market? So a couple of years ago, I did a huge deep dive into AI. What's real, what's not, what's duct tape behind the scenes? Is it actually going to steal everyone's jobs? Is it overly hyped? Are we in a bubble? Kind of all of those juicy questions that I think a lot of people were really looking at. And especially as a non-technologist wanting to wrap my head around, got really into that. And then once I kind of uncovered what was happening there, started seeing the relationship into sports. So I was a student athlete growing up. I played 4 sports in high school, and then a collegiate volleyball, and then was on every intramural team. So it's always kind of been integral to who I am, how I lead, how I think about, my role within the context of the community. And in part of my AI exploration, I had landed kind of looking at how I could support this new and upcoming sports agency that was looking at reimagining what it looks like to be representing athletes, partnership, revenue opportunities for them, kind of in this new world order, which, as you might know, Morgan, I don't know if you're a fan of women's sports, there's a boom happening right now. There's a ton of hype, right? Whether we look at the valuations of what it costs to buy into a WNBA team, or these incredible new leagues that are coming out like Love Volleyball, there's a lot of movement and action happening. And so this introduction kind of into, my love for financial wealth building for women and sports, and there's this weird technology underpinning happening at the same time, kind of brought me into where I am today, of this intersection of what is the hype, what's real, what are the true gaps, and how can, whether it's retail investors, family offices, or other folks, really impact investors, I think is who often I talk to, really look at what their role might be and how they can both create impact long-term, but also the long-term financial gains that they're looking for in the context of women's sports. And so that's been kind of the juicy set of inquiry that I've been running down over the past couple of months, talking to CTOs at NFL teams or owners of basketball teams, all the way to agency reps and brand partners. There's all kinds. The ecosystem is so vast and so exciting. It's been really fun.
Yeah, I think, and that's like this perfect blend of entrepreneurialism, right? Like there's just so much activity of people, kind of chasing threads or ideas and trying to figure out, uh, how to better serve athletes, right? How to better serve development, how to better serve, or, build community around this stuff. Um, I think, like to your point, I was sitting with my 4-year-old watching the Timberwolves recently, and he turned to me and he's like, "I'd rather watch the female Timberwolves." Uh, and I was like, "Well, they're not playing right now." And I think success will be when he says like, "I'd rather watch the Lynx.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to watch the male Lynx anymore." Um, but I mean, there's so much. Yeah, women's sports is booming. Where do you see that headed?
I think that there's a ton happening, and I think that there's a couple different places it could head. I think more broadly, a lot of folks are, when you look at the NFL, the NBA, we're kind of hitting somewhat of a plateau from an investment perspective in terms of what the revenue potential could be. And I think a lot of the folks that are working in marketing and partnerships in those leagues are doing really interesting and innovative things, but they're kind of hitting a ceiling to a certain extent. And I think what's so exciting about women's sports is that it's kind of like a startup. We can't plug and play corporate Fortune 500 playbooks, coming from the NFL, coming from the NBA, the NHL, and just copy paste them into women's sports, because the infrastructure is different. The talent pipeline and development is different. The ownership structures are different. It's a CBA year. We're still in negotiations for the WNBA for their contracts. And I think that those are great examples of this field of women's sports has only up to go and forward. So whether it's the development, again, of these new leagues like Love Volleyball, Minnesota is getting a team in 2027, I believe. When we think about women's hockey, this is a single owner. The Professional Women's Hockey League, to get a little bit nuanced and dorky about it, is a single owner entity. So one owner owns all of the teams underneath the PWHL. We happen to be home of the 2-time national champions. Hopefully we're going for a 3-peat this year, and the Minnesota Frost. But there's really unique dynamics about what a single entity ownership group looks like, right? When we don't have a Minnesota Frost ownership group, the sales and partnerships and revenue opportunities look different than if it was a more diversified, each team had different owners. And so I think the evolution of what the potential are for each of those unique aspects around the women's sports leagues is really exciting to me. I think more and more ultra high net worth individuals are looking to be part of the ownership team, whether it's for a league or for a team. I think that there's a lot more emphasis getting placed on the commercial real estate aspect of the new women's sports leagues. For example, the Portland Fire, which is going to be the newest WNBA team, they had a commercial real estate component of that deal, which is important for de-risking, but also for long-term revenue growth of that team. Whereas you look at a team like LA or Chicago, they didn't have that real estate deal, right? So that changes what their P&L looks like, what their balance sheet looks like, their total assets, and their total revenue potential. And I think having more of the agility of these teams to do that. If your kiddo is looking to watch women's basketball right now, Unrivaled is beginning, and it has just begun and is really exciting. And they're taking a totally different approach. Limited seating, they're going on tour. It's like a media house, kind of like, I think, Tiger's new Tuesday night golf league, right? It's built specifically for viewer engagement and for viewer interaction from a media perspective. And those types of really agile, quick things that Unrivaled, for example, they noticed that there were some issues with play last year. So halfway through the season, they met with all the teams. They met with, all of the players. They met with all the refs, and they said, hey, we want this to look and feel a little bit differently, because most importantly is the health and safety of these athletes. They're only here for 12 weeks. They got to go back to the W. Let's think about how we're maintaining pace of play and safety in the context of play. And that was like a group effort they got to do like that. If you watch WNBA at all and follow any of the controversy, that didn't happen. League that's 25 years old, there's a lot of calls by players and coaches to have more critical conversations about what the role of the refs are in the league and how that's maintaining pace of play and ensuring safety. That conversation couldn't happen in kind of like more of a legacy industry, right? So those types of really specific, unique problem sets and rapid solutions that are coming forward are exciting to me. And I went across the field and a couple of different teams that I'm very excited about. So sorry if that thread is not totally clear across all of those, but I think that's what I'm really excited about is we're not just standing on what's happened previously as the playbook for what's happening next. Even as we look at audience members of women's sports, I think what we're finding is that a lot more of the individual athletes have diehard fans. Paige Bueckers, originally from Minnesota, did many Minnesotans know that there was even a Dallas team before she got drafted? Probably not. But now they're wearing Paige Bueckers jerseys and Dallas Wings jerseys because she's there. Hopefully, if she comes home someday, those fans will travel, right? And yes, of course, it's easier to travel home. But if she goes to the Valkyrie or she goes to Chicago, they're going to travel with her. That doesn't happen as often in men's sports, right? You're a diehard Vikings fan, you stay a Vikings fan. You don't all of a sudden become a Green Bay fan because your favorite outside receiver went over there. And so I think those are some of the nuanced differences too that we're going to start seeing brands and teams leverage a little bit differently from a revenue driver perspective, as well as even an agency perspective. So, and kind of going back to entrepreneurship, it means that earlier in their career than previously, these athletes are founders, right? They're the product and they get to really drive their own narrative and brand building in a way that hasn't been able to be done in women's sports just because it didn't previously have kind of the notoriety, the media rights, a number of the other components that were critical for being able to build that.
Yeah, this is why I enjoy talking with you so much, because you create these lines and you follow them, and then you're creating other lines, and it's also thoroughly researched as well. So I guess as you think about, let's say, young entrepreneurs or even just like young athletes, what advice are you offering them? What would you say? Because I think when you're talking about like an established career, okay, I'm gonna go to college, I'm gonna get my MBA or something like that, or I'm gonna become an attorney. There's this like path that's sort of set up for you. And what I hear about a lot of the work you're interested in is that when you just stand there looking at it, it feels kind of messy, right? There's so much that's undefined still. But that's also the opportunity. So I think as you're looking at the landscape, what advice would you kind of offer young leaders, young entrepreneurs, young athletes who are looking at this landscape and say, what's next for me? How do I maximize this for myself?
That's a really good question. And I haven't actually had the privilege of advising young athletes. So a lot of my connections into the sports space who are actually athletes are either retired or I think like later in their career. So I think when I look at the broader context of what I'm seeing across the field, and again, by league, by sport, by opportunity, it's going to vary a little bit differently. But I think that there's a couple of core components that maybe we could distill down. So for each of the athletes, what is their unique intellectual property and their brand, right? And how are they staying true and authentic to that as it relates to their followers or the people that are backing them? Because they're getting more and more scrutiny. So I think about Angel Reese. She's got a lover or hater kind of following. The people that hate her still follow her and they're still getting into the mix, right? So she has worked really hard to maintain authenticity around who she is. And I think she's done she could be an exceptional case study on how athletes specifically can think about that, whether it's how they show up in pictures, what they say yes to brand wise, their partnerships, things like that. I think she's a great example of someone who has, even under criticism, not curtailed to be what everyone else wants her to be, but stayed really true to herself. And I think that's paid dividends as it relates to who the brands are that she attracts, and really what she holds for herself as it relates to her value she's bringing to the market. Another great example, hometown stud buds, which are two Minnesota Lynx players, who I think Courtney Williams and Natasha Heidemann, who have created this really authentic experience for their fans leading up to the All-Star weekend this year. They just started getting on Twitch and kind of talking to each other. They're really, really close. They played together for years and years and years. They have this incredible dynamic, just talking to each other and being authentically themselves and not afraid to say, I don't know what something is. And then it creates this kind of comical experience between the two of them for their fans, who I think can really relate in a lot of ways. Courtney Williams not understanding how soccer works at all was probably one of the best things that came out of Stud Buds over the course of the past couple of months, because then they're on the field with Megan Rapinoe. And I think, T is trying to tell Courtney like how it works and her not understanding, right? There's so much authenticity that they bring to their brand. And again, the brand partners that are coming out of the works for that are really interested in what that can look like. And I think, from an entrepreneurial perspective, it's that knowing your audience based on knowing who you are and what you're offering, and then being able to stay true to that overall.
Yeah, and I think I have this concept that I talk a lot about, is that a lot of us who are entrepreneurs, we almost are accidental entrepreneurs. Like we came into this through some other line. We quit a corporate job to freelance for a little bit because we just couldn't handle our boss, or we wanted to pursue an idea, but we never really thought of ourselves as business owners. And I think something that I've seen is the earlier you can kind of self-define as a founder, entrepreneur, business leader, the better it is. Whether you're working a W-2 or for yourself, or you're partnering with some organization, whatever that is, the earlier you can do that, the better. And that's what I kind of hear you espousing as well, is if you can see yourself as the business, you will just you'll create more impact that way, and be able to define more opportunities for yourself. What other takeaways are there for kind of general businesses in what you're talking about here?
I think that's a really great point. And something I want to maybe underscore is, when I started Lunar Startups, we were kind of looking at what are the indicators we can measure around confidence for founders when they're coming into the program versus when they leave. And one of the things that I was able to identify over the course of building the program is really that self-identification and the importance of what it means for a founder. So there's 3 types of capital that are critical for every entrepreneur to be successful. Doesn't matter where you come from, where you live, what you're building. The first is social capital. Do you have the network that is going to help you move the needle on the business the way that you need to? The second is inspiration capital. Do you have peers around you who can shine a light on pathways to growth and success in a way that you can problem solve quicker? There's a huge correlation there. And then, of course, financial capital. There's other types of capital like intellectual capital and other things, but those are the 3 I think I really focused on. And that inspiration, social capital piece of when a founder moved from saying, oh, I'm a business owner, or I have a side hustle, into saying, I'm a CEO, I am a founder, there was a marked and measurable difference in, I think, 3 different categories. First, the number of places that founder opted into, where they raised their hand and said, hey, you have this problem, I have that problem too. I'm actually building something that solved it. Do you want to hear about it? And then boom, you've got a customer interview. Or raising your hand and saying, hey, Star Tribune or local paper, I'm building something really cool. Will you help me talk about it? Or, hey, I saw there's a panel on AI. I want to be a panelist there. I'm a CEO and founder. Beforehand, when you're a business owner working on a side project, most folks aren't opting in to those types of opportunities. And those are the necessary opportunities that help folks continue to grow their visibility, their brand reputation. Founder reputation is absolutely critical for every company's revenue. The founder brand is really, really, there's a strong correlation. 40% of revenue can be tied to the founder brand and reputation. for every company. And so doing those things really only happen after a person self-identifies in that founder, CEO, kind of executive suite space. So that's like my one advice, whether you're a problem solver coming out, I think about like the accidental founders are just folks who have a solution to a problem that they personally have experienced. I think athletes are a little different. The problem set they're identifying and founding against looks differently, and they have to navigate that differently. But I think otherwise across the board, if you're creating a service, a small business, a tech company, whatever that might be, being able to kind of like hone in on that problem set and how you identify within the context of that problem set really shapes the narrative and therefore shapes how you see yourself and ultimately what gets reflected back, how others see you.
So if you had to sum up your own brand in one sentence, one or two sentences, how do you answer that?
I think Danielle Steer as a brand is a Swiss Army knife who can bridge the gap between high-level strategy and on-the-floor execution. I'm kind of a unicorn from that perspective. I can see and connect the dots, but I'm not just building structure or solutions kind of at the high level. I'm thinking about the actionable step 1, 2, 3 operational capacity of what it actually takes to meet the strategic goals for an organization, a person, whether it's wealth building or otherwise, or for an ecosystem.
5 stars would recommend. Yeah, absolutely. I think we can see that's very true. So we'll share more of Danielle's details in the episode notes. But thank you for joining us, Danielle. This was so fun. And we'll see you all back here for the next episode. Danielle, where can people find you if they aren't following already?
I have been resetting my own brain in 2025. So I'm off of social media for the most part, although I am on LinkedIn, as well as my website, daniellejsteer.com, or at Tundra Ventures, tundraventuresvc.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Danielle.
Thanks for having me.